everyone. So it's lovely to be here. So I think I'm the last session of the summer school, which adds a lot of pressure because I know there's been an incredible set of lectures so far. So I just want to give a huge shout out to Ahmad and others who helped organize this summer school. And today my topic is very broad. So I think this session is titled Mentorship, which can be many things. I'm actually going to suggest the following. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how the spaces for research have changed and what that means for like your paths as like going into research. And then I actually would love to open up. So I'm hoping to spend most of, I guess, probably like the last 25 minutes on open discussion. And then I'm happy to stay a little bit more afterwards if people still have questions. So we can treat this like more open. And I think that's always fun because I get to hear what you're thinking about. But I also think it's a timely moment to talk about really this interesting shift because we're in the middle of it, which is how the research spaces we're in are changing. And why that matters is that even take this meeting, the fact that we're close to 300 people here and connecting from across the world, many of us may be in formal research institutions, but many here are independent researchers, right? And that just simply wasn't conceivable, like even a mere 10 years ago. Like typically the path has been very narrow into research and now it's expanding. And so I think this is fun to think about and can help inform like, what do we mean about your path into research? And like, how do you succeed in this like new, more flexible era where there can be many more paths? So I lead Cohere Labs, which is both like the sessions, the open science community. This is a session that is led by community leads, as well as a core industry lab. So you may have met some of the research scientists like Marzia or Ahmad, who do a lot of research that is much more computation intensive. And then we do a lot of work on policy as well. We share a lot of works, you may be familiar with this, but I'm going to be sharing my perspective today. So I work a lot on designing like large-scale systems. So a focus on efficiency. We do a lot of work on multilingual reliability. So I'm happy to talk about these after the talk, although today's talk is a bit different. So recently I've been thinking a lot about how science is done. How do we get to breakthrough? Why do some ideas succeed instead of others? Who contributes to breakthroughs? Who gets to be part of it? And what's interesting is that this talk is about who gets to do research and how those breakthroughs come to be. So, you know, what's the secret or the recipe behind it? And to start thinking about this question, it's worthwhile thinking about how we got here, what or who determines who gets to be a researcher. So a lot of history tells us that research, which is pushing forward the frontier of ideas and innovation, requires a surplus. What do I mean by this? It means that you require some type of premium or buffer so that you have the space to think about ideas. And in many ways, us all being here for an hour of time is a type of surplus. We've all decided this is important, or we're going to allocate this hour because it's something where we want to think beyond the immediate time horizon of like what's for lunch or what we have to do today. And typically, most of history, this surplus wasn't present. So it's only recently we've had the stability to have a surplus to think about research. So even the first academies, which we'll talk about, is just 387 years BC. And so who gets to be a researcher and who gets left out? Often research requires space and resources to insulate and focus on ideas. So the first academia was derived from academia, which was founded by Plato. So this was like a lovely olive garden and grove, which was a physical retreat. So you retreated from the city to think about ideas. And in early history, these spaces were typically associated with religious institutions. So because of both like limited surplus, most dedicated researchers were supported by either royals or papal policy. And what's interesting about this is it really influences the type of work that was done. So even, patronage systems very much could determine what ideas succeeded and what didn't. And so even though members were often poor, religious institutions were rich and powerful institutions. And so they offer the stability. Traditionally, similar to art, the early groundbreaking thinkers required patronage. So Plato, Galileo, Leonardo da Vinci. But there's a key turning point, and that is with the beginning of the printing press. So why was this an important turning point? What changed with the printing press? Who wants to weigh in? Just put up your hand. Who wants to be brave and start us off? Excellent. Okay, I think that the first was, actually, let's just go for Sad. Do you want to go first? Yeah, just unmute and then go for it.
Okay, hello everyone.
Yeah, so why did the printing press change things?
Pardon?
Why did the printing press change like this concentration of knowledge?
Hello, you're breaking. I think can you hear me?
I can. I might go to the next person just so we keep it going. So you can come back. Let's go to Taisija. Do you want to weigh in? Yeah, Taisija, you feel free to jump in. I think everyone's just very eager to raise their hands. Okay, so maybe I'll just do Meenakshi. Do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, this is my opinion. I think the invention of printing press expanded people's knowledge. I mean, it was a medium of spreading knowledge and all of that.
Yeah, precisely. It increased the flow of information. So it meant that there was a dramatically larger pool of people who had access to information. And it's hard to put it in perspective, but it had a profound impact on the speed up of science. So for example, if you look at European book output, it rose from a few million to 1 billion copies, which is absurd, that dramatically increasing access to these ideas. And this really helped with a quicker dissemination of ideas. So this meant that it also became lucrative for scientists to publish ideas because it became more clear who was first, depending on who printed first. And so that led to just a massive speed up in scientific innovation. However, who got to participate in this new scientific renaissance remained tightly coupled with status and wealth. So even, if you look at Charles Darwin, Albert Einstein, Charles Babbage, it was very much still intertwined with who had personal wealth. And in fact, the post-Renaissance term for scientist, for independent researchers, someone non-affiliated, was a gentleman scientist. And so even the researchers were kind of considered noble in many ways. Royal societies were an effort to try and make it more professional so that if you were independent, you could prove yourself and get accredited. So that was the Royal Society of London, the French Academy of Sciences. And so we see this as the first premise of the university, of the academic PhD programs. So have things changed? So we see in this that there's still a narrow set of people who can become scientists. And the question is, where are we now? So in many ways, the beginning of the Royal Societies was the beginning of this formalization of a professionalization of scientists. A new language emerged to describe who is a scientist and who isn't. And my good friend Roseanne Lear describes this as the unreasonably narrow path. And I still think in many ways, this impacts a lot of our field. Because if you want to do research full time, you often have to choose between these two paths, industry or academia. And in order to be considered, you have to fulfill a narrow rubric that requires choices very early in your career. So, writing the paper in your undergraduate, access to a top-tier PhD, getting the right top-tier industry internship, working with the right people, having enough PDFs, clear and easy to describe research agenda, getting the right industry role. And this characterizes a lot of the most famous people in our field, right? So Leon Bourteau, Jan LeCun, Zubin. These are all researchers who follow this very narrow path. And so in some ways, we still have a rubric for describing who gets to become a researcher. And we end up rotating the same group of people in academia and industry. So now that we've had more industry labs, the same group who follow the really narrow path gets rotated. And while we no longer use the term gentleman science, I think some of the same concepts of privilege and access to resources still apply. But I think here, it's important to say, who made this rubric? Why does it have to be this way? And is it in your favor? What if you don't fit? And the data we have tells us that this narrow rubric means that many people are left out of this room. You see, when you have this extremely narrow path, you lose people at each step because they didn't make the right jump at the right time. And I think this is one of the most important aspects, which is formalizing science as this path. It means that you allocate surplus to a narrow group of people. And typically, these are the people who knew extremely early on what the path was. So how do you change the rubric? And is there a third way? A lot of why I'm here and a lot of why Cohere Labs exist is because I strongly believe that there's a third way. And in fact, I think that we're at a moment with scientific discovery where it's ripe for a revolution of how we do breakthroughs and how we create this third way. And there's two reasons. So one is we're not as bound to physical spaces to generate breakthroughs, right? So one thing is here we are all in this meeting together, but we're all over the world. And so the traditional definitions of like academia and these formalized spaces were also very determined by geographic belonging. You have to be in the right place at the right time. But the second is that since the printing press, information has become more accessible, not less. And so the notion that we have to guard information and only study it within certain settings, I think is much more strained. And for those reasons, I think the formalization of science, all those loopholes that you're meant to jump through, I think it's time for us pressing that point of like, why does that exist and how can we change it? And how do we change spaces for breakthroughs? I also think it's worth saying computer science is very short. So modern computer science started after World War II in 1945. And so even the first Dartmouth conference was in 1957. And that means that the time that has passed since then is really very little. And that means that even though these things feel fixed, in fact, they're very malleable. It's only 2 generations that have been part of this field. And that means it is ours to shape. It is all of yours to shape. And it's very important that we change the spaces where and how and by whom research is done. So we're one of the first intentionally hybrid research labs. And this was by design. We said we're going to have an open science space and we're going to have a traditional industry lab with enough resources to really fuel some of these changes and breakthroughs. But there's other spaces. I think, you know, Kipu, RIA, Masakani, Deep Learning, and DAB will all change these spaces. And they expand the past possible of how to be a researcher. It does not mean that the journey is easy. So I think today, a lot of what I want to chat about, and I'll share some tactical suggestions, and then I want to open up, is that it's actually far from easy, right? I think it just means that these paths now exist. And so for anyone in this room who wants to pursue research at the frontier of AI, which, by the way, right now is wide open for shaping. There's so much that is happening. It means you have a shot. And if you're not in a PhD program, if you're not located in one of the, centers like London or New York or Silicon Valley or Paris, you can still have a shot of shaping the field. And that's the important part, which is very meaningful and I think so important for us to talk about today. As we talk about the topic of like you following your research path into machine learning. And feel free to start putting questions in the kind of chat. I'm going to kind of start jumping into questions as we go through. So I'm going to share now, really, I think what I would suggest thinking about as you think about your path, because it's hard to determine what leads someone to succeed, but Who says I have a very long and specific question? Wesley. Okay, well, if it's a long and specific one, let's wait. I do like that you acknowledge it's long before you ask it. That's funny. Yeah, we can talk about that. So yeah, that's a very good question. I think Wesley's asking, how is it different? We'll definitely have a chance to talk about that. So I have probably a few more slides, and I think I'm going to make it in 10 minutes that we have half an hour to really do discussion. So here's what's guided my own journey, and these are more principles. I had a very unusual journey. So I grew up my parents met in Sudan. I grew up mainly in Mozambique, but I was also, they moved a lot. So I was in Eswatini, Lesotho, Kenya, they moved to Liberia. So when I came to the US, I came on a scholarship, and my path was in many ways, like I worked at a startup called Udemy. I joined Google Brain, was still Google Brain. I did do my PhD at Mila, but in many ways, like a lot of my efforts along the way were to change how we did these formalization, because growing up, I never knew there was a possibility of contributing at the frontier of AI. So how do we shape and change those spaces? And so even how we've built Cohere Labs has been, let's build breakthroughs like Aya in this very dynamic and new way with many people around the world. And I've done both industry and academia, so I can speak a little bit to that question when we get to it. But the principles throughout, and what I think about when I think about my research journey are the following. So one is, I would suggest going narrow before you go deep. But then the secondly is, don't stay narrow. So when you first start research, it's very easy, as you understand like how quickly the field is moving, to want to sample everything. Like even this week, there's probably going to be 12 very high caliber papers that come out, but probably more than 200 papers in total that you'll be tempted to read. And so I think one suggestion I have is, you're going to have to master your craft. And craft is typically an exercise in repetition. And so I would suggest choosing a single problem. And it doesn't really matter what it is. It just matters that you find people who are much better than yourself to work on it with, and go narrow. So for me, when I started, and when I was doing my, when I was kind of early in Google Brain, I worked on interpretability. And interpretability, actually, the more you work on it, the more you realize it is a very difficult problem because of lack of ground truth. And actually, my first papers were all grumpy papers. They were saying, talking about how existing interpretability methods were completely unreliable, and we could show it using these edge cases. But it was very helpful for commanding a single discipline extremely well. And then that linked very well to things that I did next. So this is my second suggestion, is that many researchers end up being small in their overall career because they stick to what they're comfortable with. And what I mean by that is that the best researchers are able to connect ideas across subfields. And what that means is you have to have courage to take a leap. Because once you go narrow and once you find the command of a certain discipline, it's very tempting to stay the expert in that discipline and to do incremental pivots of ideas. You have to force yourself to sample something else and to collaborate in a different way. And I think that's particularly important now with the field moving so quickly. So I was maybe unusual. I did both computer vision and I did language very early on, before it became like this combined topic. But I think that was mainly because I actually didn't box myself by domain. Like I was more interested in questions. I was interested in efficiency, which kind of cuts across everything. I was interested in robustness, which cuts across everything. So I would really frame, what's your question, rather than boxing yourself into a technique or a modality. Then the other is, don't do incremental work. This is the most important. It also feels obvious, but I think people do it all the time. So one is, what is incremental work? It will mean something different to different people, but if you find yourself over-optimizing for just getting a paper in, rather than like, how does this fit into the wider field? I think that's probably a sign it might be incremental work. If you find yourself being scooped all the time, not just once, but like repeatedly, that's a sign you're in a very narrow search space, and you're probably optimizing for very short-term gains. If you find yourself kind of squeaking out less than a percentage point improvement with your techniques, that's probably a sign you're in a very, very fiercely over-saturated space, and maybe you need to kind of broaden and understand the wider. And I love the questions are coming in, keep them coming. And then the third is work with people who are better than you. And the other is collaborate widely. I have some tactical suggestions for this. I think work with people that are better you is very easy when you're starting out. So I think that's the easiest time. It's just like you should just work with people who you respect. When you get a bit more experience, I think it's your main criteria should be changing your collaboration pools. And so I think that try and vary who you collaborate with. How do you do that? I think one of the best way is to essentially reach out to people you admire. I would suggest sending an email a week to people that you admire, and just tell them that you like this paper of theirs. So I think that, and Gustavo just asked this question, so I feel like I'm responding to real time. So do you have suggestions on how to find collaborators? Yeah, I would start by not explicitly asking to collaborate. So typically collaborations are formed over a relationship. Start by just making a commitment to email once a week someone whose paper you admire and tell them why, and say, you know, if you're ever at a conference, I would love to catch up. The second is, I think the second is to not wait for someone to collaborate with you. So you can showcase some of your work. I think that's another kind of the next point is that, which is this one, which is learn while teaching. So one thing I suggest is people are always waiting for a project to be hand delivered to them. But I think one of the best ways to actually take control of your path is to teach while you're learning. And that can look like many things. It can look like organizing within the open science community. So for example, Ahmad is one of the organizers who's put this on. He is doing this, but also at the same time, like he is getting to know the community, the speakers, understanding like the impact of the series. There's other components like that where you can actually just share. This is a piece of code that I really enjoyed. Communicate your learning process. So you're not just waiting until you get the perfect project handed to you. And I think that's something that people often miss. They're often waiting for mentorship to be hand delivered. And it really is, because bandwidth of mentors is almost always too small. And so you showing initiative helps kind of create that. The other thing I want to mention is be generous as a collaborator. So typically the researchers who succeed in the long run are the researchers who people want to collaborate with. This is honestly the biggest rule that you will learn, is that it is not a massive community. And so your reputation as a researcher, your generosity, how you work, matters so much. And I mean, what I mean by that is that if you, the most successful researchers have recurring collaborations and collaborate widely and are invited to collaborate widely. And what this means is your calling card of how people feel about working with you is so important. And I really cannot emphasize that enough. And then I'm going to add 6, even though I don't have it here. And then we'll open it up. Mohammed, I think you need to mute. I think you're, perfect, yeah. I want to share one more, which is that you need to be a bit fearless. What I mean by that is that this is going to feel being an independent researcher is probably one of the most lonely paths there is. And it is very hard because you're in it by yourself and you're pushing yourself, and you need to be fearless, meaning you have to find it in yourself. Why do you want this? And you have to have a sense of progress for you. And that's why I'm saying teaching as you're learning is important. Organizing things within the community so you meet other people, so you feel like you have structure, that's so important. But then the 6 is pay it forward. So I think that this is important because so much of us doing a revolution and changing how this works is all of us continuing to shape our spaces. And that's really crucial as we try and make this the standard of how people contribute to research and work on breakthroughs. So with that, I'm going to open it up. I think this is perfect. We have half an hour for discussion. I already see some kind of, let's see, how do we do this? I think we have some questions in the chat and some with hands up. So Wesley, your question is in the chat, right? I think that might be.
My question is not in the chat. It's kind of a long question. Should I?
Oh yeah, okay. Say it and then I'll decide when to answer it.
I actually read some of your previous papers and I saw like your work on pruning quantization affecting accuracy and like specific types of predictions and like the multilingual models. So I did a project-based master's where I did like neural network compression, and I'm interested in like Japanese language. I know like Command A supports Japanese, but that languages other than English and Chinese still need more support. So recently with like the open science, I've been doing like the computer vision stuff with Ash, the LLM stuff with Finn, and like the paper readings. And Hiram told me he talked to you before, and that's how he got started working on Aya. So for me, I haven't had a chance to do research before. My undergrad was in accounting, so I don't get responses when I reach out to people to like, if I want to like get involved in research. And I really appreciate the opportunity to get research mentorship. I was wondering if you have any work that you'd like done, and I just feel like it'd be really meaningful to like work on improving the aspects of models that currently need more attention.
Yeah, okay. I feel like that touches on a few topics. I won't go into the sparsity now. I have done a lot of work on sparsity, and I'm happy to talk separately. So in terms of mentorship, I think we mentioned a few. If you haven't gotten responses for your email, I would think about what your email says. Does it just say, I want mentorship? Which is a bit kind of the way that your current question was framed. I would recommend being more tactical. So it sounds like you've done some preliminary work on Japanese and sparsity. If I was sending an email to me, like what I would write is, hey, I loved your work on sparsity. I have done early experiments on sparsity, on Japanese and sparsity. Can I have 5 to 10 minutes to lead you through it and to get your input? That's like super well specified and much more likely for someone to jump in than something which is like more open-ended. And maybe that's what you wrote. I'm just saying, for the benefit of everyone, I would suggest kind of sharing there. The other thing is that what you will likely get, and I'll share this, is that you're likely going to get a lot more responses about immediate collaborations from first author PhD students than from professors, or because their bandwidth is much more constrained. But like, let's say you're thinking about PhD programs, one of the best ways to get on the radar is also not just contacting the professor. You can definitely do that, but it may just be not responded to, and don't take that personally. Contact the PhD students at that lab as well and say, I really liked your paper. This is some of the areas. Do you have 5 minutes to talk? I think people often assume that the mentor has to be someone who's very prestigious, but actually some of the best mentors are people with training, but like more bandwidth. And so I think that's also worth taking into account. Okay, I'm going to try and get through some some questions quickly. How can we address these data gaps? Okay. Sorry, let me see. This is a long question from Rami. Okay, maybe I won't start here. I'm going to stop presenting just so I can see these questions a bit more. Okay, let's see. Mohammed asks, what do you recommend to a student doing a Bachelor of Science in AI and wants to get something published during their bachelor's degree? Okay, I mean, so if you're doing already a Bachelor's of Science in AI, it sounds like your Bachelor's of Science is quite specialized. So that's already good. If you want to publish something during your bachelor degree, some of the easiest ways to do it are self-organized collectives. So a bachelor, it depends on your university, candidly. If you are at a university in the US, you may have outlets to publish. But I think if you're in other parts of the world, you won't have a clear research group. So again, it goes back to the other recommendations, is that you may want to join an open science community and check there. We actually have dedicated channels, like looking for collaborators, proposing a project. I think Madeline can share those in the chat. So Sachin says, how do you find and absorb research papers in the domain to get a broader and deeper understanding? So I guess there's a few things. One is, I would say, choose your domain first. Typically what I do when I recommend to all the different collaborators that I work with is when you start a topic, create a spreadsheet and create all the relevant related work for your topic, and do it once at the beginning of a topic for like 2 weeks, and write in the spreadsheet the paper link, the name of the paper, what it does, what does it evaluate on, what's the limitations of the evaluation they do, and also like commentary, like, oh, I don't think this was a strong baseline paper, things like that. After 2 weeks, it doesn't really benefit you to keep on overfitting to work that keeps coming out. Otherwise, you might get derailed from your project. So I say once you've decided and established that it's still an important question, just go for it. Start experimenting, because there is also a cost to constantly going back to the literature. I think that people end up feeling a bit overwhelmed because they're constantly in the literature and it derails them from the actual project. So I typically do very intensive literature review at the beginning and then set it to the side. And then I don't come back to it until we're ready, we've established a paper, unless something comes out that clearly scoops the results. But ideally, if you've chosen your question correctly, that's not as likely. Yeah, I'm going to take someone who has their hand up now. So Harsha, go for it. What's your question? And actually, Ian's asked a similar question, which is how long should you spend dedicated to getting the basics down, reading all the foundational? So I think I answered that. I would do probably an intensive 2 weeks at the beginning of a project, and then just have that as a repository. Cole, go for it. You have your hand up. Nice.
Yeah. I also added this in the Q&A chat. And so my question is sort of around supply and demand dynamics changing. So when you lower the barrier to entry, which is great, and it gives a lot of people opportunity, you also create this supply demand paradigm where there will be a sort of influx for a limited number of positions. And I don't know if that number of positions is going to exponentially increase as cost goes down necessarily. So I'm just wondering, like, realistically, if so, you can go do a PhD, you can go do your master's and do research, or you can sort of pick the independent path.
Yeah.
Either way, there's like this kind of deep commitment that you have to have for a period of time before you sort of get into a role doing these things. Yeah. And at that point, will there still be the incentive structures in place where, other than just passion, where it is worth it's the wrong word, but I'm curious how you see it changing over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, so certainly for some pursuits, there is a narrowing of spots, and there's some pursuits which belong solely in academia because either there's not more spaces for them or there's not more momentum behind them. Like studying European history, I think, is a good example that you could do that as an independent researcher, but would there be the resources in the long run to like support you as you got past that independent research part? I think with computer science, actually, we've been through this fundamental switch where a lot of the most frontier research has moved out of academia and into industry. And so that fundamentally changes the dynamics of like, where do you end up as a researcher? And I think there's two characteristics I would point out. One is that there's far more industry labs where you can do frontier research. However, I would also say there's also far less, I guess, positivity for publishing within industry, especially lately. So you have to decide what's your balance. And like, are you doing this because you want to publish or share with the world? Are you doing this because you want to be part of the frontier and like working on problems? I think if it's the latter, like there are many more spots than there was at any point previous because our field is connecting with the real world. Like what we previously only talked about at conferences is now used everywhere in the world. So that's true. But will there be a dynamic of being able to publish? I think in certain labs like ours, I'm very proud we're publishing, but that's more narrow, and that's been getting more narrow as the technology has become more important to different people. Okay, and I'm going to try and get through quite a few more rapid fire. I can't see the Ask Me Anything. I don't know if Madeline can share. So maybe just share in the chat. Okay. Hopefully that answers a little bit, Cole. And so let's see. Aisha asked how to find job opportunities for beginner industry ML researchers. Typically for beginner ML researchers, if you don't have a PhD, the biggest hurdle you're going to have to overcome is showing your equivalent. So you will want to show portfolio projects, you will want to show research projects, you ideally have some research publications as an independent researcher. Cole is right, either way you're kind of committing to this kind of intense building stage of like building your portfolio. So that is what stands out. There are some opportunities. We have a scholars program, which is specifically targeted to beginners who are extremely strong in engineering, but really want to try AI research. And so there are opportunities like that, but they're more limited. I don't think many other companies are leading those type of programs right now. I think OpenAI has a version of a scholars program, but you can't publish. So again, you have to decide what's your premium on those things. And then I think Gokiana is saying it's very hard to decide to do a PhD. Is it possible to work on one topic for many years and still keep it meaningful? How can we find a topic that matters? Okay, so I think this is a very important question. It is true that a lot of the most innovative AI has moved to industry, mainly because of compute. It depends on your risk calculus, right? I think that if you feel like you have opportunities in industry, then I think you could get away with not doing a PhD. But let's say you're coming from a part of the world where you don't have access immediately to frontier labs. You can't get that equivalent experience easily. A PhD is still the most de-risked path to get to where you want to go if you're aiming for the top tier labs. If you don't, if the balance is different there and you want to aim for different things, then maybe, for example, if you have access to internships or if you have access to these open collaborations, then maybe you can get away with it otherwise. What to work on? I would say it depends where you are on your journey. If you've already started working on an area, you have to exercise that first iteration. You have to get through the first 2 papers, and I would stay on the same area. After that, you'll probably develop a research taste. It happens automatically after about 2 papers, where you start to get a sense of what problems are good and what problems are bad. How do you decide what will still be meaningful? That's part of your research taste. A lot of people who start just want to work on the hardest problem, and that typically is the easiest to be scooped, and then you go wider. Malin, your hand's up. Did you want to throw in some questions? Go for it.
Yeah, there's a theme coming up in the Q&A about maintaining your confidence and your sense of self when the field is moving so quickly. Do you have any thoughts on this, Sarah?
Oh, nice. I just found the Q&A. Perfect. Okay, lovely. I would say you have to shut out something. So remember what I said earlier about you can do your literature review, but then put it to the side and stop overfitting to the paper coming out. Also, remember that you need that the idea of getting to a paper is a very sparse reward. It means it takes a long time before you get there. So I think what's important there is you really need some type of more frequent reward, which means that you should help engage in community subfield. Like you should respond to someone's question on Discord. It will give you that sense of progress, even if your paper, which takes longer, it is still underway. Another thing that I like to suggest is writing a blog about a topic that you're reading about, or consolidating all that literature you did in the first 2 weeks into a literature review. Again, these are ways of getting more frequent rewards because it takes so long to get to that first paper. Okay, so let's take maybe one other hands up question and one. So Warda, did you want to go? I think you're muted, Warda. So while you figure that out, Harsh, did you want to go? I know you have your hand up. Go for it.
Yeah, so just a quick question. You talked about incremental work, right? So how do you realize when sort of, it's time to pivot? How do you know, okay, I've done this work for this long enough period of time. I'm getting some results, but not necessarily the high impact work I'm looking for. So when do you decide, okay, now it's time to pivot and go to a different route?
Yeah, this is excellent. It's like, when do you call it and say, we've exhausted this? So actually, this is very important. One thing is, I very much suggest anything that you embark on, you should be trying to create experiments so that you prove yourself wrong early and quickly. So typically, for example, when we start a project, we write a scope doc and everyone jumps in to say, what are all the areas this could fail? What are areas this is stronger? Mainly because the philosophy is you want to fail quickly. And the reason for that is that it's not great for anyone if you spend a year on a project and you still, it's murky, like could it succeed, could it not? If you don't have results after all those initial experiments are done, it's easier if it fails completely, to be honest. If it's murky, what you're describing, it's much more difficult. And you have to develop a sense of, firstly, isolating, is the question still important? Like, do you still care about it? Because you have to care about what you're doing and enjoy doing it. It's just too much work otherwise. If you do, if you're still enjoying it, keep pushing. You know, some of research is stubbornness and you need a sense of perseverance to get through. This is another important skill. Like, it requires some degree of perseverance. But if you're 6-8 months in and you feel like you're not getting to a meaningful calibration of any signal, expand your research portfolio, take up another back burner project, and at least have 2 so that you can understand better where you fit. But I will say that having that failure point early on is one of the most valuable skills, and it helps distinguish who has a lot of skill as a researcher, the ability to stress test really quickly early on. And I suggest proposal docs are a great way to do that because you can ask for input from many people, and it can help surface that failure mode very early. Okay, so now we have a lot of questions. Okay, Malin, do you want to surface another one from the Q&A? Go for it.
Yeah, there's a nice set of themes about the role of papers at this point. And is this the only way to kind of do research to get noticed? What about working on products, applications, or industrial type research?
Yeah, I actually think that, you know, the notion of producing usable artifacts is much more powerful nowadays than it was previously. So, for example, with iExpanse and iOvision, we released the model, we made it available through API. It is heavily used by different communities around the world. That's a super impactful release. And that isn't just about a paper, right? I think that that's about how people continue to use it. If you package a library, or if you do, or if you make a contribution that is very popular on Hugging Face, that certainly counts. I think more so now than previously, especially for industry labs. For academia, unfortunately, it's got a bit of inertia. It's still kind of trapped by incentive structures that it's being built around. So their papers are going to count for more. But most innovation right now is happening in industry labs. And so certainly there, artifacts are highly looked upon because it shows that you're actually building stuff that works, you know, and that, you know, your research idea has resulted in something that is high performant. And I think that's some of the best evidence, right, that what you're doing is interesting. Okay, so now I think we have Warda with their hand up. Yep. Okay, I'm going to skip to someone else how that goes. Ahmad, you have your hand out, and Tiasa, maybe Ahmad first.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask that what do you think differentiate between a good researcher and great researcher? Like lots of people graduate from same school, batchmates, but how do you decide that the difference between a good researcher and someone who has the potential or who can be a really great researcher?
I think it's 2 things. One is taste and problems, meaning great researchers typically ask the bigger picture. They don't ask, how do I get the most acceptances into the next conference? They ask, where is the field going? And what do I think is the important question to ask? And then I think the second thing is typically great researchers collaborate widely. So most great researchers across computer science have actually had very wide collaboration networks, which means they don't overfit to an institution. They sample ideas from many places and they're considered good to work with. And so that means that it's just it's an accumulation effect. So once someone is considered good to work with and is open to like collaborating and being kind of calibrated from many places, it's good. The third thing I'll say is that it's someone who's not locked into the ideas, meaning greatest researchers have had some ability to be stubborn and persevere, but also to admit when they're wrong. And so it's a delicate balance. You want to persevere because you need to make progress on your idea, and you need to have enough perseverance to not get disheartened by the first rounds of experiments. But you need to also be open to criticism and to be able to take feedback, because a lot of research, what decouples great from good is the researcher's ability to really invite feedback from so many different sources, but still have a sense of, okay, I've heard all this feedback. I still think I should push with this for a little bit, but I'm going to take this into account into what I work on next. So it's like, it's a balance, but it's actually got a lot to do with taste. Okay. Where are we going? Tiasa, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. So I actually am, so let's say I'm working on a topic and, I intend to join industry, but at the same time, I see that the scope at industry is like there are some teams who actually publish. For example, Google and NVIDIA, they publish pretty heavily. On the other hand, there are great companies who do not publish. So I actually want to understand this insight that, let's say I pick up a research team, maybe it can publish or it may not publish, but I want to have that idea that, okay, if I really join this team, it can help me to grow as a researcher. But it may happen that I might join a team, but in the long run, I may not grow as a researcher. So how to distinguish that and make a good choice in joining the team at the time of hiring?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of teams that don't publish that are still doing groundbreaking research. So for example, the Cohere machine, like the modeling team, so we're the Cohere Labs, so we publish externally. There's also a modeling team, and a lot of what they do is novel research. So one of the big questions you have to ask if the team is not publishing, it's very possible they're still working on research, right? Because research is just an unanswered question. So it's not something that's been discovered before. So I don't want to minimize that is still super interesting and super impactful. So I would definitely recommend some of the questions you asked there are, how much of this is maintaining existing code bases? How much of this is designing new algorithms? How much of this role is unknown? Like it might change like what we have to do to get to the answer over the next few months. You may not publish, but you may still be working on super novel research, and it might still, you grow a lot as a researcher. So that's some of the things I would ask to understand that. There's also infrastructure teams, but typically, especially if you're working at a frontier AI company, there's differences, right? Most frontier AI companies are kind of at the edge of what's possible. So a lot of what they're doing is research, right? In more big companies where a lot of it's integrating AI into existing commercial workflows, you might be taking an existing solution, and the challenge there is like, how do you make it work for the existing customer base? That still is novel, but it might not be quite the same as the research. Okay, so
sorry, I have a follow-up question.
Okay.
Sorry. So it's like, so how much, so let's say when we publish or we show patents, it's like we are kind of showcasing our work to the world.
Yeah, patents counts.
Yeah. How much does it take into account? So let's say there could be great researchers in the team who are not able to showcase their work. Does it actually really matter, like in the long term, what you can showcase and what you can't?
Ultimately, what matters is your reputation in the field. So like, let's say, because remember, there's a difference between what I'm talking as research here, which is like you're contributing to the frontier of unknown problems and being an incredible engineer and having a big impact within a company. For that, for engineering within a company, your colleagues see your impact. It just won't be visibly external. So it doesn't really matter if you have papers, because I think there what matters most is like how your career grows. People will see that you were promoted. I think things like that. Here, I'm only talking about what matters for your reputation as a researcher, contributing to unknown ideas. And there, I think patterns are one way, but you kind of have to show in other ways that you're doing innovation. And so if that's a blog post, that can be it. But it's hard if there's no, it can be your reputation with the people around you. But there, it probably matters more you do a PhD, right? So you at least have some external pieces that you can talk about. If you're solely siloed within a company and you don't have enough data points that you can share externally, it's hard for people to know you as an innovator, someone who designs new things. So does that make sense? It's a bit different, those two paths. Like you can still be a very competitive engineer and have an impact, but if you want to be a researcher or be able to do that as your full-time job, you need to demonstrate innovation some way. Okay, we have so many questions. I think I'm going to do rapid fire. So Warda, you finally got your volume working. Go for it.
I think you can hear me now.
Yes.
You can hear me now, right?
Yeah.
Yes, finally. Hi, this is Warda. I'm from Bangladesh. I'm an undergrad student. So currently I'm doing my research with tokenizers. So basically I got interested by a Cohere's paper, the Fishing for Magikarp one. So my question, I also am reading your paper, One Tokenizer for All. That one I'm reading currently. It's open in my another tab. Okay. So my question is I am interested in this field. I love to learn about LLMs. I want to go into any of the subfields of AI or LLM, but my interest is not limited to just that, right? So I also enjoy learning about how compilers work. I also enjoy learning about computer architecture. Now, since I'm an undergrad student, I'll be targeting a PhD program, and I have to narrow my field. I cannot obviously do a PhD under all those topics, right? I have to choose one, and most probably that's going to be AI or in any of the subfield of AI or machine learning. So my question is being in research is a long run. Throughout the process, how do you prepare yourself so that you are able to jump from one of the field to another? Let's say I'm currently working with LLMs, probably I can jump to, I don't know, networking or security. How do I prepare for that? Even if my PhD is in something narrower.
I don't think you should try and over-optimize at this stage. I think that will come later. The first step is just being good at one area, right? You need to build your craft. So for example, once I had done interpretability, I ended up doing sparsity. Could I have guessed I would do sparsity before I did interpretability? No. And if I tried to over-optimize for what I would do next after interpretability, I don't think it would have been a good use of my time. So I wouldn't over-optimize. I think focus on where, and for your first choice, right, I would mainly focus on where do you have collaborators who are really good. It doesn't really matter what you do. It just matters that you're with people who are very good and can guide you. So I would choose based on mentors and project scope more than I would over-optimizing the topic area. Hopefully that's helpful. Okay, let's do some rapid round because we have 6 minutes. So why don't I go, so Salem, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay, go for it.
My question is around good taste. I think in academia it becomes pretty easy to start developing good taste. You have good community around you. You really have a professor to discriminate what is and isn't a good topic.
Yeah.
This feels much more difficult when you're an independent researcher. So my question is, it's how do you actually develop this skill if you don't really have access to all of these resources?
Yeah, I agree. It is more hard. I think one thing we've been trying to do to address that is we do Expedition IA. So we kind of provide a forum where people can pitch their ideas and some of the research scientists can weigh in and give feedback. But I do agree, how do you get that outside of that format or when that's running? I think, Malin, can you share an example of our project scope that we write? So one thing that I always do whenever I have an idea is to write down exactly, so we have no bad ideas as well, but can you share the project scope template? Because I think that's also very good, which is you write down exactly what your idea is, and then you can share it in the community, and you can even share it with some of our researchers. Typically they will weigh in and they'll say where they think it could be stronger. I think that forcing function of writing the scope is also super important because it forces you to, we will do, Vestal just asked in the chat, we will do another version of iExpedition later this year. We just finished one, which was super successful. It had 40 teams, I think. So now we'll do another one later. But that articulating of exactly why this question is important in related work can be very important. Yeah. Okay, so let's do a few more. So let's see, Karun, are you there? Okay, I'm gonna skip. I'm gonna go to, Karun.
Yeah, sorry for that. So I also posted a question in Q&A. So I'm an undergrad student right now, and I'm working with my advisors. So the thing is, I'm working on a project for more than a year now, but all of a sudden, our funding have got cut, and I'm kind of stuck in the middle. The project is halfway, and I don't know what to do at this point because we don't have any resources right now to continue the research.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty complicated problem. It depends how what's the goal of the research, right? Like if it's in a stage where you can release like an intermediate work, like even preliminary findings, I would suggest doing that just so you can get it out there and get the artifact. If the results are murky and the funding's gone, I think probably you have to ask yourself with your advisors, it sounds like, whether you can continue. But a lot of it depends like where you are in the project lifecycle, the answer to that question.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
So how can I leverage this unfinished project in my, let's say, my graduate applications?
Well,
Like,
that's why I would recommend packaging it as intermediate findings and releasing that, because then you can point to it. You know what I mean? Otherwise, it's really hard. It just becomes an internal project that you can't really talk about. And you could even talk about like preliminary findings. It doesn't have to be groundbreaking. You can talk about learnings along the way. Okay, I think Sinem was up earlier and was skipped. Sinem, do you want to go for it?
Yeah, I have a question about like concurrent collaboration. So I'm at a stage where I'm transitioning from neuroscience into AI research. Give you a bit of a background. So I do have a PhD in neuroscience, and I've mostly been finding like hackathon groups and things like that, some of which are more fruitful than others. Given that, not every project that you start can be published or like does lead to like exciting results. Wondering if you had like any advice for how to kind of juggle concurrent projects, and also like maybe like when to stop, like when you're like, okay, this is enough, like I can't really take any more on my plate.
Yeah, I would suggest, so if you're trying to segue to a job in AI, I would suggest that most important for you is like contributions you've made a significant contribution to. Those are typically like first author contributions because you need to prove you executed a lot of it. If it's at the intersection of AI and bioinformatics, I think maybe you get away with like being a domain expert and being more tangentially involved.
No, these are like first author projects, like either they're shared first authorship and things like that. That's why it's like they're so time consuming.
Yeah, and in that case, I would suggest narrow it and go based on where you think the credibility of the collaborations are most important. But it is very hard to do even 2 first author projects well. Like it's just the detail, the level of excellence, running the experiments. It's very hard to have a wider portfolio than 2, I would say, if you're first author. If you're involved in like a more middle role, like you can increase it. I think that's fair, but to do well as a first author, I think that would be tricky. So I would then go based on where do you sense this team is actually bonded enough to get to the end? Because a lot of open science collaborations, what's tricky is it ends up being pulled by a few people, but not everyone is bought in. And so I would also have that conversation with your collaborators. Hey, I really want to get this to the end, but I want to see who's actually engaged and wants to be there with me. And that way we'll bond a bit more. Okay, I'm going to stay. I can stay 10 more minutes. I know we're over time, so please, if people need to leave, feel free to leave. Maybe I'll take, Mai, and then Ayesha, I think, I also saw pop up earlier. So Mai, go for it.
Okay. Hi. So I've done some work on using LLMs for mental health diagnostics, and I haven't considered any racial bias, any fairness into that. So what would be the first steps to incorporate this into my framework?
Yeah, okay, that's a big question. So I'm going to suggest we post on the Discord and do it afterwards. I've done a lot of work on fairness. I'm happy to weigh in, but maybe for now, let's put that on the Discord. Madeline, maybe you can share for everyone. I think there's a question of how do you get to the Discord. Ayesha, go for it. Did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, so the research, the Cohere Research Scholars Program, so that's something that I find deeply interesting. I just wanted to ask you, do you have any tips, like how can I prepare for it? Like the applications are going to open soon, so any tips for that?
Yeah, there's going to be a separate whole session where we talk about for anyone who's interested in the Scholars Program. So I'm actually going to say, watch out for that. So Madeline's here. She will also share. It will be well publicized, so you'll know. And we'll do a full hour on that. So I want to make sure, maybe we won't talk about that here, but there will be a full hour just to go into the Scholars Program. Okay, Samuel, why don't you go for it? And then Mohammed.
Hi, thank you, Sarah. It's been really beneficial having your talk here. I'm currently doing my PhD in bioinformatics, and I'm really interested in the AI expedition. I was wondering, is there any chance to contribute next year in 2026? And also, I really want to push through like in certain area that I'm really interested in like AI applications in healthcare or life sciences. Is there like a way to do this like with Cohere? Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I think so. The answer to the first question is yes, we will have another AI expedition later this year. I think it was very impactful. I think probably we'll start kicking that off. I won't say a date because I need to calibrate with Madeline, but it will be a big effort again. So it'll be over 6 weeks and it will be really meaningful. And we will share that ahead of time. So I would watch out for that. And then I think we briefly had a healthcare group. Do we currently have a health group within the communities? Because that's one option, which is that I think we are missing a bit of a conversation about healthcare applications right now. So it could be meaningful, Samuel, if you're interested within the open science community. I'll let Madeline weigh in on that. Do we currently have a healthcare group?
We have an application. So Madeline has left the call, but we do have an application. Like it will be starting soon, I think. The healthcare in AI.
Yeah. For okay, so that's another option. Okay, so and then Mohammed. No, already. I think did we hear from you already? We did, right? Yeah. Okay, so Mohammed, go for it.
Hi, my question is that AI is growing so rapidly that it can feel overwhelming for beginners who want to build a career in it. What's your biggest advice or your best advice for someone passionate about AI but struggling to keep up with and find their place? Basically, AI is growing field, rapidly growing. And what is your advice for beginners?
Yeah, okay. I think I covered some of it for the presentation, so I won't go into too much, but I think get started. Probably the biggest issue I see with people who are starting in terms of who makes it is people who spend too much time looking at all the resources, reading all the resources, and almost get paralyzed by reading too much. You have to get started in parallel. And that can be a small thing, like answering people's questions on Discord, or it can be a small thing like joining one of the subgroups, or helping organize something, or writing a blog post. But inertia, like just being paralyzed, is probably why people don't make it. So you have to create structure of some kind to overcome like the inertia. Yeah. And then maybe I'll take one more question and then I have to drop. So Oyen Dolapo?
Oh, yes. Thank you very much for the.
Yeah.
Yes. In my background is AI. I'm writing algorithms and methods, but right now I'm doing my PhD in physical therapy, transitioning to health.
Yeah.
But I've realized that most times the core AI community don't really acknowledge the people in healthcare.
Yeah.
Methods. So I tend to have researches that we spend months or years trying to develop. You come up with something, an algorithm or a method that just does maybe 1% better than the previous ones, but in the broad AI community, the LLMs and all that, they see us as secondary.
Yeah.
So how do you? So the question is now, how do you, in this space, in the medical field, where 0.5% is really, really important.
Yeah.
You then showcase yourself against the broad scope of people where every method you can come up with a method today and publish. Meanwhile, in the healthcare, you can't just publish. You have to go through clinical trials. This is like 3 years of your life for 0.05% accuracy improvements. So how do you what do you do? Because right now I'm in that space where in the industry, I work as a software developer because I can't really work as an AI engineer because my algorithms are not as rapid as what the field wants.
Yeah. I would say, so probably also, it sounds like there's a need for a healthcare space in our Discord. So I think that's one takeaway from this chat. Maybe I'll chat to Madeline and get her input, how we can support that. Because I hear a lot of you saying, expressing interest, or at least like we should, kind of give a little nudge to that space and bring it back to life. I think it did exist. Here's what I would say. There's no easy answer. When you're on different timelines across fields, interdisciplinary is the hardest role to play as a researcher, because the benefit is you're sampling different ideas. The trade-off is you have two different incentive structures. So you have the incentive structure of one field, the incentive structure of another. What to do about it? I think that the more people in that field and the more connected you are to people at the intersection of both, the easier it feels for you, because you feel like you have a group you can connect with. So that's one thing I would say. The other thing I would say is you have to be clear about what is valuable to you in the long run. So 3 years for a study, if this is an important question to you, it's still worth it, right? Like, this is another thing to weigh. When I said research taste and what makes researchers great versus, good, it's like taking bets and being like, this is still important. It takes a lot of time, but it's still important. So I think it's a balance. I don't have a perfect answer, because you're right. It is the hardest intersection to be at, which is in the intersection of two fields. Okay, I have 2 minutes. I'm going to take 2 questions. So I'm going to try and do Yusuf and then Louisa, and then no more questions. Yusuf, go for it.
Thank you, Sara, for giving me a chance. This is Zaif Talpur from Pakistan. I'm currently studying a master's program, and hopefully tomorrow is my initial research seminar. But I still joined your program, your session, and it's worthful more than that. One thing which is considering that I'm thinking about that choosing 2 choices between academia and industry. So the one more concern is about how financially we become independent choosing these 2 areas. So what can lead us to a chance that these algorithms, computer vision algorithms and all, and AI converting into a streamline of a business or something like that? So are we still the researchers behind on that stage worldwide, or is it just centralized to the the US and Western side? This is my question. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, there's a few questions in this. It's kind of a big question. I guess one was about money, like how financial outcomes. I think the other was about, does this, if you're in industry, does this just end up about product in the long run? Okay, so it depends where you are in the world, the answer to these questions. Typically, industry pays better than academia. At least that's the case within most countries. And there's maybe exceptions. There's some institutes, for example, in France that pay the same in industry and in academia. I'm thinking of one which is purposely benchmarked to academia, but it's very few. So typically you are paid more if you're in industry, and even internships as a PhD student, typically you go to industry and you make a lot more money over the summer. In terms of outcome, what do you give up when you do industry? You may not be able to publish. Over time, what you end up working on may be closer to product than it is pure research. So you give up some degree of freedom. There are exceptions. Like if you came to Cohere Labs, you have a lot of freedom. You get to choose. But those are also more competitive positions. And so you have to make the choice. If you want freedom, complete freedom, the best way to guarantee that is in academia. If you want, and everyone has different circumstances. If you want both, like the ability to work on interesting problems, but also lucrative, you may want to explore industry, but there's just higher variance between opportunities. Okay, Louisa, final question of the day. What is your question?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So thanks for the talk. It was great. Lots of insight. My question is more about community building of sorts. Like in terms of like your previous answer, I'm basically currently in industry. I work as an AI engineer, and the word research is like a sensitive word. No one wants to do research. Everyone wants to do development. Like quick delivery. We have big clients, we know who we serve, no time for research. So like, but I'm kind of lacking on in real life type of context. I'm lacking a community of other people interested in these topics, and I spend lots of time online. Like online, I know many people that I have a clear path to AGI. Basically, every day there's someone that has super cool ideas. This specific thing needs to be changed in a few years. It scales to AGI or whatever. So like, yes. In my previous interest, not my previous, in my current interest, there's lots of I don't know, interdisciplinary type of focus, and I would kind of like to be able to build or expand or foster some sort of physical community, like out of nowhere, just trigger interest in the people and the brains around me in a way in which there's like basically what you have done with the Cohere open science research community, but just a solution from nothing to a group of people that want to discuss the
have you seen the Papers in the Park? Recently, there's a Papers in the Park initiative where I've seen two versions of this, but one in Toronto, I think one in Morocco, where I think that's a great way to bring people outside and discussing the paper. I would think about stuff like that, like how do you get people together and maybe just organically start discussions. I'm going to point out